Hey guys, Becca here. Today I want to talk about the book Serpent and Dove by Shelby Mahurin? I don't know, names are hard. Anyhow, by that chick. This is a debut young adult fantasy novel, and I thought it was okay. And this is one of those books that wasn't okay because the whole thing was profoundly okay. This is one of those books that was good in some aspects and pretty freaking meh in other aspects, which combines to an overall agglomeration of okay. This is a review, so it's going to be spoiler-free, and without further ado, let's get into the premise. So this book takes place in kind of a pseudo-medieval magical France, where we have our two main groups. We have witches, who of course can use magic, but also occasionally employ it on random innocents to very negative effects, and then we have the chasseurs, who burn witches, but are also like super, patriarchal religious jerks. So that's kind of our main dynamic here, and surprise, surprise, our main female character is Lou, who's like this very fiery witch, who is, for some reason that is unknown, ostracized from the rest of the witches, and she's kind of slumming it in the city and trying to hide. And then we have our other main character, Reed, who is one of the chasseurs. He's very like priggish, very upright, moral dude who is kind of stuck in some archaic ways of thinking. And these two meet because Reed sees Lou robbing a house with a witch. Lou gets away, gets beaten up. Reed finds her again in a theater, but it looks like he's the one who beat her up, and that shit ain't okay. The Archbishop, who is the master of all the chasseurs, is like, hey, we can't have one of our guys look like you're beating up a woman if you're not married to her. It's okay if she's your wife. Like, people get that. You gotta beat a bitch sometimes. It happens. But like, if you don't know that woman, it's not cool. So we're gonna cover this up by having you guys marry. Have fun. And Lou goes along with this willingly because she's like, not trying to be found by other witches, and she's like, well, surely the safest place is the place where all the magical dudes who want to kill me are. So yeah, that's the premise, and as you can see, it's kind of a standard YA, like, oh, you're stuck together, but you're on opposing factions? Have fun, work it out. Sort of like enemies to lovers sort of deal, I guess. But honestly, the relationship was the best part of this book for me. Both Lou and Reed are like kind of a pain in the ass in their own way, so I really enjoyed watching them needle each other and like piss each other off. Lou is like vivacious and fun, but she's also like a bit too obnoxious, like she's a bit extra sometimes. Reed is hella priggish and kind of like tough, but out of touch with his emotions, and he has a sensitive side and he's buff as hell and hot too, right? Like that's kind of the sort of character that he is. They mesh well enough, like it wasn't a perfect relationship. I'm not really into romance usually, and I thought this one was kind of enjoyable to read, which is like impressive for me. There has only been one relationship ever where I was 100% on board, so if I'm like kind of on board, it means it's a well done relationship. By the way, this book has a sex scene, and when I was listening to it, because audiobooks, I was eating this freaking gigantic sandwich that I made. It had like layers of turkey and lettuce and onion and an egg, and it was probably about this thick. And this scene comes on, and I'm in the middle of just devouring this absurdly large sandwich, and it felt right. It was a spiritual moment. But yeah, be warned. Now you may be thinking, Becca, well, if the romance is decent, why would you rate this a 3? I'm glad you asked. This book really has that debut novel plot feel. Like, probably about 80% of the book is developing the premise and going along with the slow burn romance. And that part was effective doing what it did, but it didn't really have much of a plot outside of the slow burn romance aspect. And then the last 20% were just shoved like a lot of plot with these like shitty paper cutout level villains. The thing about this plot is the more you think about it, the less it makes sense, especially with some of the revelations that come in later in the book. You're like, wait a minute. Why? Why? It's just that the plot itself is not that great. It's pretty generic. There are some kind of obnoxious moments. Like there's this like bar song one character bursts out into in the middle of a very serious fight, and that actually stops the opponents, which is like, oh, okay, sure, whatever. Whatever you say, book. And also, like, this is one of those books where you clearly have two sides who both have some good people on them but are against each other, and usually in those sorts of narratives you have, like, moral investigations of who's really right or how should we resolve this, and this book just kind of jumped to straight for, like, we'll find another way without actually doing any real moral analysis, so it feels kind of weak. There's a lot of just witches, like, completely mutilating people in horrible and bizarre ways, like, this guy has metallic skin that's leaking this black fluid that isn't quite blood and he just won't die. Like, I don't know, I love that sort of creepy stuff. I really would have wished to see more of the witch's magic and, like, thoughts about that and how it impacts people, because it was just so gnarly. But do we get that? No. No, we don't. Another thing is that this novel appears to think that it's feminist, even though it's not. So, like, they mention a lot of gender stuff. I mean, the Archbishop is called the Patriarch multiple times, but, like, there is no point that it's trying to make about gender. It's just kind of throwing it in there so you can read about how people used to be sexist. For example, Reed had this previous love interest who was, like, perfect and demure and kind of the picture of what a woman was supposed to be at that time, and that, of course, is contrasted with Lou, who is this body person who dresses as a man, runs around, is a thief, you know, just not the picture of femininity. And I guess the book is trying to say, like, look, both of these are totally viable positions for a woman to hold, but that wasn't really in dispute. Like, that is something that has been covered in the last 30 years by feminism, not really something that needs to be established nowadays. There's no, like, brilliant and bold positions being taken here where you're like, wow, this book is really making a point. There is no point. The biggest thing to a point is like, whoa, you shouldn't beat your wife, even if you're married. That's not okay. And, like, that's not feminist, so why have all this discussion of gender or thoughts about gender if you're not actually going somewhere with it? It was just kind of a weird inclusion to me, personally. Like, I'm okay with books that aren't feminists, and I'm okay with books that are feminist, but I don't see why you'd have kind of, like, feminist overtures in a book that isn't. So overall, I'd give this a 3 out of 5 for a surprisingly well-done slow burn romance, and I'm kind of a romance Scrooge, so I hope that means something here. But the plot, just don't think about it too much. Just don't think. If you have thoughts about this book, feel free to throw them in the comments. I will check them out. All right, thanks. Bye-bye. Kind of fun to read. Ugh, read and read. Why? Why would you do this? It just doesn't work in audio. Why, Shelby Moy?